If you're watching this video, it's probably because I sent it to you. Now, if I didn't send this to you, hello. It's time to put down your coding questions because we need to get you ready for your software engineering interviews. I've been prepping engineers for their interviews for many years, and I'm here to give you advice that you won't find in many other YouTube videos. Because most of the prep videos on YouTube are made for entry-level to junior-level engineers, which is helpful, but you really need to have a broader understanding of why you're grinding out coding questions and how those questions apply to the real world. In today's video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself so you know why I'm qualified to help you, and then I'll give you general interview prep advice. And lastly, I'll give guidance for all software engineers at every experience level, including some mindset work. So who am I? Hello, I'm Farrah. I hold a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of North Texas, where I specialize in graphics programming. As a software engineer, I wrote binarization algorithms that were able to read text within images and video, then convert that text into machine-readable search strings and documents. I ended up leaving engineering and pursued other fields of work, which led me to work in technical recruiting. I've worked as a technical recruiter for Google, Lyft, Uber, TikTok, the New York Times, and I am currently an active recruiter who works for a successful dating app called Dillmill. I've recruited and prepped hundreds, if not thousands of candidates and helped them successfully pass their interviews. So let's start with prepping your mindset. When you go into an interview, you're probably nervous. I know I used to get super nervous, and because I was nervous, I would say things or do things I normally wouldn't say or do. So to help with nerves, here's what I want you to do. Shift your mindset from thinking that you're in an interview, and instead think of yourself as speaking to a current colleague that you've never met before. This will shift your mindset from thinking that you need to impress the interviewer, and instead imagine that this person may in fact be someone you end up working with in the future, which will have a calming effect and lead you to giving better answers. Now, this next piece of advice is intuitive, but most people forget to do this during their interviews. If your interviewer gives you a complex problem, then here's what you should do. Remember, you're imagining that this interviewer is a colleague. Now, if a real colleague came up to you to ask you a question about a problem that they were having, would you immediately give them an answer? Probably not. What you'd probably do is ask clarifying questions in order to understand the problem that they're asking you, and then you give them an answer. I want you to do the same thing in your interview. Sometimes during interviews, interviewers purposefully leave out information that you need in order to give the best answer because they want to see if you are going to ask clarifying questions. This is especially true when an interviewer asks you behavioral questions. Behavioral questions are questions where the interviewer asks you questions based on how you acted or would act in a specific situation. What kinds of questions should you ask for clarification? I like to use the 5 W's and the H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now really try to understand the why behind why they would ask you this question, and then take it from there. So now let's pivot and talk about specific ways to prepare for your software interviews. How you prepare for your interview will depend on your experience level, which we call leveling. The various levels for an individual contributor are entry level, junior level, mid-level, senior level, and staff level. The higher your level, the more you'll be expected to understand complex systems and common issues that would come up. So you're shifting from being a programmer into a software developer. Now, before we start preparing you for the technical piece, it's time to do some research on the companies that you're interviewing with, because this will have an impact on the answers that you should give in your interview. Are you interviewing at a startup, a mid-level company, large legacy company? This is important to know because your answers to questions may be tailored to the type of systems the company has. Because FYI, most interviewers are evaluating your answers against the systems that they are working on, not necessarily the ones you've worked on. So, for example, startups will be able to make quick pivots, and you'll be expected to write more lines of code, where one wrong move could make an entire system come crashing down. Whereas a legacy company will have an older code base where many other engineers have gone in and manipulated that code. But an error is less likely to happen. So when it comes to the nitty-gritty of prep, remember, there's a difference between programming and software engineering. Programming is writing code and algorithms. However, software engineering is programming integrated over time. And there are 3 critical differences between programming and software engineering: time, scale, and the trade-offs. When software engineers work on projects, they have to think about how the software will change over a period of time. They need to plan ahead and make sure that the software they're creating will last a long time. In a software engineering organization, it's important to focus on making the software as efficient and scalable as possible. This is because software engineers often work on very complex problems, and it's important to make sure that the software can handle all of the demands that will be placed on it. So yes, going through technical questions that you find in LeetCode or the book Cracking the Coding Interview are important, but how you apply those solutions is even more important. So now let's pivot and talk about how you can practice. Remember, don't only focus on whiteboard questions. They are helpful, but only working these will not get you through the interview process. LeetCode is a great resource to help you prepare. Easy questions are good for warm-ups. Hard questions really aren't practical for interviews, and I've never seen one asked in an interview. Not that it can't happen, but I've never seen it. Instead, I want you to focus on medium questions. Solve at least 25 medium questions, although I encourage you to practice as many questions as possible. Focus on fundamentals. Your interview will not be focused just on LeetCode type questions, but it's still important to review fundamentals. Interviewers will evaluate you as though you are a senior engineer, no matter your leveling. Before I get into this topic, if you're enjoying this video, give it a like and a subscribe because it really does help my channel. To become a senior engineer, you must be able to demonstrate this ability by showing that you can tackle complexity and ambiguity, teamwork, collaboration, communication, enthusiasm, and a passion for learning. Here are a few specific characteristics I like to see in senior engineers. Someone who cares about monitoring and alerting, not just unit testing. Can negotiate with non-developers, especially product managers and operations staff. Knows how the software will degrade if various systems are not working. And lastly, someone who understands the deployment process really well. Now, junior developers are often supervised by senior developers, and it's the senior developers who deal with the consequences of the actions of the junior developers. If a company you're interviewing for has a huge amount of concurrent traffic, then they would want to know how you would deal with that. Some terms you should be able to define are sharding, replication, latency, cap theorem, and optimistic pessimistic locking. Some systems that accomplish this are Amazon's Dynamo, Google Spanner, and Bigtable. When an interviewer asks you a question, don't just regurgitate the answer. Verbalize your process for reaching a solution, because oftentimes in software engineering, there is no predefined solution. You have to work towards a solution, and the process to get to the solution often requires a lot of analysis, balancing trade-offs and discussing alternatives and accepting feedback. The interviewer wants to know how you reach the answer, not just if you reach the answer. How do you trade off time and space? How do you present alternative solutions? Also, keep in mind about any edge cases that could come up. Interviewers at FAANG or larger companies are primarily looking to see if you can make reasonable architectural and design decisions for large-scale, complex systems, and still know how to write software despite presumably spending more time in meetings, design reviews, paperwork, and management than actually coding over the past few years. Something else to keep in mind is that the larger the company you work for, the less lines of code you actually get to write if you are hired at any level, because there are different levels of bureaucracy. But the systems you work with are much more likely to function in a vaguely reasonable way because of the bureaucratic precision that went into making them. Interviewers are definitely evaluating ability to communicate on complex technical topics. Specifically, they want to know that you can communicate clearly, efficiently, and without being egocentric when mentoring junior engineers. So now let's talk about ambiguity. Answering a bunch of questions about data structures and algorithms is great, but if you don't know how to apply them to an ambiguous question where you are not given the method signature, what the inputs and outputs are, and what the data format is going to look like, then you'll most likely fail. Interviewers will intentionally give a vague and ambiguous question to see how you tackle that scenario. How to tackle ambiguity is one of the parameters that you're going to be graded on. Your interviewer may ask you a question like, can you come up with an alternative solution to the problem with a different set of trade-offs? So you had better be prepared to think of what trade-offs would make sense. And this is where you need to ask clarifying questions. So now let's talk about time efficiency. Let's replace time efficiency with practicality. So let's say hypothetically, you get a question about quick select. There are a number of answers that you can choose from. You can use brute force, you can create a heap, or you can implement the partitioning algorithm. Partitioning is the most optimal format, but it's too difficult to write because it takes too much time to solve. If you use this as an answer, you may not be able to solve it during your interview. Interviewers would rather you use a less optimal approach, such as using a heap, and then quickly mention a more optimal algorithm and why you're not going to use it. And it's because it's too complicated due to the time constraints of the interview. So in this case, it would be better to use a heap sort because it can be written much quicker. Recognize practicality and simplicity over always coming up with the most optimal time-efficient algorithm. Now let's talk about teamwork. When asking questions, ask questions as though this is a colleague and you're solving a problem together. Don't ask questions of your interviewer that ask for any type of validation, like, is this the right solution? Demonstrate teamwork by asking collaborative questions as though this person is your colleague. Sometimes interviewers just want you to answer the question. And if that's the case, then just move forward and answer the question. Now I'd like to touch on behavioral questions. You are not being evaluated as much about your past experience as you are being evaluated about your future potential, especially your ability to learn and execute on a project. It's about the how more than the what. Some questions an interviewer may ask you could include, how did you execute on projects? How was this accomplished? How do you explore new technologies? So be prepared to discuss prior projects with the mindset that it's about the trade-offs you made and why you made them. Now let's talk about system design questions. It's less about coding and more about frameworks, APIs, and design patterns. This section is the architectural portion of how to bring a system together. Scalability could play a factor as well. There is a great GitHub page called the System Design Primer that I'll link in the description so that you can use it to help you with this section. And lastly, here are some additional resources that you can use to help you prepare for your interviews. Note, I am not sponsored by any of these. I'm just sharing them with you. I've mentioned it a few times, LeetCode. LeetCode is the gold standard in online preparation. They have a huge database of questions to choose from and paths for preparing for your interviews for most of the popular tech companies. The Tech Interview Handbook is a guide that was created by former Google engineers that gives you a step-by-step guide on how to prepare and lots of great tools to help you on your coding journey. Cracking the Coding Interview, which is a book by Gail McDowell, is a classic prep book that you should read cover to cover. It's been around for years, and you may be able to borrow a copy from a friend or your local library. Now, if you struggle with answering the common interview question, tell me about yourself. Take a look at this video where I give you a mind-blowing technique most people never use.